You're listening to Counselors on the Couch, an open conversation between counselors, coaches, and specialists discussing how people just like you can solve a multitude of challenges. Counselors on the Couch is hosted by Dr. Chuck Carrington. We invite you now to join us on the couch to listen in as Dr. Chuck and his specialist guests and experts candidly share insider information on how they help solve the problems that drive people into counseling.
Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking once again to Kathy. I have to ask you because, I messed up your name for like the first 2 or 3 segments and I kept calling you Ahearn and you said it's pronounced Ahearn, but when you say it, you don't say it either way. So say your last name properly. Ahearn. As like this is a hymn.
Like a hem.
Ahem.
Ahearn.
Ahearn. Okay. I have Kathy Ahearn with us again from DivorceCare, veteran leader at DivorceCare, and Dr. James Strickland with me, friend of mine. And as I've told everybody, the smartest man I know. So we're going to expect a lot from him again today. Hey, I know you're smart. You can pretend, but we all know. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is a little bit confusing for people, but it's I think it's a very common problem, and that is during or after a divorce, that feeling of being lonely. I call it being alone, but not lonely, because loneliness is actually a state of mind where being alone is just a state of being in the moment, and it's not necessarily permanent. But people who go through divorce have so many reasons to feel lonely, and it starts to become a definition of their lives. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit because it is a big problem, especially for the recently divorced. Understanding why loneliness can be a problem, like most other issues of adjusting and coping in divorce, helps us to reduce the fear and the confusion about what's happening. And most of us can acknowledge that human beings are social creatures and we like to be together. Extroverts, by definition, gain all their strength from their personal interactions and that excitement of being part of something. But introverts, even though they tend to draw their energy from their alone time, still have a need to have other people in their life. We are not designed to be alone, isolated in our lives. We need people because it's our interaction with people that lets us know ourselves. We use people as mirrors. They show us through how they respond or react to us, what we look like externally to them. It's very important we have people in our lives. So for this reason and others, it's true that nobody really wants to be alone. And your level of social interaction is going to be unique to you, but you're going to have some desire to be connected, even if it's on a superficial level. Separation in your marriage immediately puts you outside of that relationship. You may not be totally isolated, but you're now outside of something that you've come to rely on as part of your self-definition. Divorce, once it's final, really puts you outside because now that relationship is at least legally come to an end. You don't have the definition anymore. And for many people, it's completely at an end. If there's no children connecting you or any business connecting you, you're back to being single. And singleness can provoke loneliness. So what we want to talk about today is some definitions and then some emotions that are common with divorce and separation that create this feeling of loneliness. Now, I define loneliness kind of unofficially as a pervasive attachment to the emotions that exist when somebody believes that being alone is not okay. It's not acceptable. So we're going to talk about the development of loneliness. For some people, it's not really applicable, but I think for most of us who've been divorced or are getting divorced, there's times when you have that existential loneliness. You sit there and you think about some of the scary future what ifs. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast, but it really all comes down to the emotions that you feel based on what you see, which creates an interpretation in your mind of what's going on. So before we go on to those various feelings, I'm going to ask James first because he is the smart one. So I know you as a scientist are very persuaded by what you can see and what you can test. And you're a very cognitive guy, which is fine. You're just not as good as me, but you're a very cognitive guy. But you know as well as I do that being forced into or entering into a divorce or separation is not all about cognition. There's a lot of feelings. And I'm just wondering, what was it like for you, a man, men tend to want to be cognitive, to be hit with all those emotions when you're not accustomed to it?
It was overwhelming. It was like trying to fight back a flood with a broom, in that you try to distract yourself You try to be as cognitive as you can. You try, or at least I tried to look at this as a problem that needed to be solved so that I could stay in the front part of my brain. But no matter how hard I tried, I got inundated with the emotions at what appeared to me is to be the most inappropriate times. And no matter what I did, when they would come seeping through, eventually they would come gushing through. And I just felt like I was drowning.
The imagery there is perfect. So first of all, I've never heard anybody say, push back a flood with a broom, but that looks pretty vivid to me. That's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you said it comes rushing in, it overwhelms you. You feel like you're going to drown. A lot of water metaphors here. The term we use in counseling when you have that onslaught of emotions, flooding, because you become overwhelmed like a tsunami of emotions, and it destroys your coping strategies just as surely as a tsunami is going to take out infrastructure.
Oh, yeah. It washes them away. Mm-hmm. And it takes a while for the crest of that flood to pass before you can even start to try to rebuild your psyche again. It's just so overwhelming that I felt like my brain went on tilt. I mean, I had no way of coping with this. And the emotions that come in from that, the anger, the abandonment, the rejection, and I know we'll talk about these later, but it's like they all descend at once. You're lost in this morass, and it's only by going to sleep or giving it time that it passes, because it's so intense that I don't think you can withstand that level of intensity for prolonged periods of time. At least I couldn't. So I'd take a sleeping pill and I'd go to sleep at night, and I'd wake up the next morning and I was able to sort of regain my footing enough to push it back off and go back to the cognitive stage where I felt like I had some level of control.
So from a male perspective, what you did is very common. It's actually what kind of we expect is we go to the cognitive, we try to control what we can, and when we can't control it, we shut down. The problem is when you shut down, it also gives you time for the emotions to start building up again. So it's not just one flood, it's flood after flood. And as it recedes, it's still causing change.
Yeah, just another dimension of the gift that keeps on giving.
Okay, Kathy. So you're the only woman in the room right now. So we're gonna make you speak for all women.
All women.
All women. Okay. But as a woman, a lot of guys don't get this, that women really do balance emotion and logic simultaneously all the time. It's just part of how women's brains are designed. They can do things us guys can't do naturally, or at least instinctively. But in the case of divorce, because women do feel so deeply about relationship to begin with, I have to imagine that it's overwhelming for women too to have all those emotions at once, also attacking while your stability, which is usually defined by relationship, is being threatened. And so your cognitions are being attacked while your emotions are being attacked. And I would think you're getting hit from all sides. Do you remember the storm?
When we're talking about this, what's interesting for me, and this is from what occurred with me, is the fact that when we talk about all these emotions and everything like that, I felt them long before I left. And I think some people are in that position where you can actually be in a marriage and feel so very much alone. So that's the perspective that I personally know, is the fact that, the loneliness and the emotions and everything were going on for so long that when I actually left, I was still, if you want to use the water metaphor, James, it's like I was in a whirlpool that I couldn't get out of, because it was just swirling and swirling and swirling. I didn't know what emotion was what. That's the best way that I can think of describing it. And for those who have, it was not their choice to end a marriage, if these things are to come upon them, I think mine was a gradual flooding. Whereas, when a person's marriage ends abruptly, it's like the storm. And no, we are knocked off our feet, but yet, we also are looking at so many things that we're responsible for at this time that we don't have the energy for. So in some ways with guys, so it is different. For me, it was so long ago. Thank goodness it was so long ago. I have a memory of it, but I don't have a feeling of it anymore. but definitely overwhelmed by the sense of aloneness for me, the aloneness really came out in the responsibilities that I had.
I think that really does do a good job explaining. I like the whirlpool versus the flood. It does.
You think of a toilet too.
Well, I wasn't thinking that way, Brooke. Now that you put that in my mind, now I'm thinking of toilets. I'm highly visual. Be careful what you say. But it does illustrate the difference. So most men, they go to that fix it or run from it kind of perspective. Women look at everything else is connected to this, and you can't just let it go. One is about relationship. The other is about identity. It's quite interesting, I think, how men and women think different about the same exact thing. And Jim's not here today, so I was going to ask him, but he's not here, so we can't. I do remember the emotions, and I chose to leave my marriage. I was the one who instigated it. At first, it was a relief. And with relief was a lot of guilt. And then there was panic. It was all those things. So even when you're the one who chooses to leave, it doesn't necessarily make it emotionally easier. It's just a new set of emotions that you weren't prepared for. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the common emotions that are experienced during separation or divorce. And I put them in an order because they don't necessarily progress. They sometimes come all at once. One can create the next. So I think the first one that I hear a lot is confusion. What happened? What's going on? How can I fix this? And the panic seems to come first. It seems to be that the lack of information or insight really makes people feel vulnerable. And their first instinct is, let me fix it. So since James is a guy and guys like to fix things, I'm going to go back to James. Do you remember feeling confusion at first?
Yeah, because I was so blind and it came onto me so suddenly that it was like a bad car accident in slow motion. There's just so much stuff going on. And at first, there's just disbelief. The trauma is so significant that you can't even begin to believe that this is really happening to you. And then you start saying, okay, well, what can I do to fix this? But I don't really know what went wrong. So I don't know where to start. And your former spouse is going through a highly emotionally charged state as well. And so they're not being real clear with you, and they're not being very communicative with you. So you're grasping at straws. You're trying to look for cause and effect. You're trying to understand what happened. But in most cases, really aren't any cause and effects. There have been, micro causes and micro effects that have led up to this macro event. And so you can't go back and deconstruct everything that happened. And so because of that, you can't really fix it. The other thing is that, given the difference between men and women, things that you may have thought were insignificant to you may have been hugely significant to your spouse. And so you didn't understand it when it occurred. And now going back retroactively and trying to understand it, trying to unring that bell is a very futile effort that is extremely frustrating and very confusing. It's almost like you're in shell shock. There's your World War II analogy.
I knew there'd be one.
because you've had this massive insult, and it's attacked every sense that you have. Your sense of being, your sense of normalcy, your sense of predictability, your sense of future, your sense of direction, your sense of who you are. And you're like in this big open field by yourself, and nothing looks familiar. You don't have a clue where you are or how you got there.
So Kathy, thinking about confusion, James just did a great job laying out what it was like for him, and not just male perspective, but perspective in general, but for men. I'd like to hear I know you said that you're the one who had to make the choice, and so you knew it was coming, I guess, over time, but still the actual decision injects chaos. So can you speak to confusion a little bit?
One of the things that jumps out at me when we talk about confusion actually is loss of control. Because regardless of what the dynamics were in our relationship, we had an element of control there, whether we provoked or whether we didn't respond or whatever that was. But all of a sudden, you just don't know. You don't know what ends up. You truly don't. You had something that regardless of the health of the situation, you had something that upon which you based your life. And all of a sudden that has overturned. So there's a lot of confusion as far as and there's confusion about, in some cases, well, what did I do? Why didn't I see this coming?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, why didn't I see this coming? And the emotions, the fact that there are so many emotions, you don't even know what emotion it is that you're feeling at that time. So you're just, it's like a big ball of yarn, multicolored yarn that everything is just all tied up in. And so you don't know what's going on. And in that confusion, there's a loss of trust in that confusion, not just of the other person, but of yourself.
Or circumstances.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So confusion can be so many things. Now, as far as whether you take that confusion and try to if you try to break down why you're so confused, that in itself will help you because of the fact that it's going to take you out of the emotions into having to think.
Mm-hmm.
But so since your world has been shattered, what is reality?
That's a good way to look at it. You said control. Well, loss of control means loss of predictability.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a negative relationship,
Mm-hmm.
there's certain
Mm-hmm.
rules that get developed that we can predict the outcome from. If you provoke somebody, they're going to react probably in one of very few different ways. Their coping strategies are well established. And when you inject chaos, and loss is great, like a divorce, it overwhelms your coping strategies. What you used to do doesn't work anymore because all the variables have changed. And it's the same with your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so predictability is no longer something that you have. So without control, without predictability, you now have fear,
Mm-hmm.
chaos.
Yeah, I don't know that it's so much predictability as it is familiarity. I drive a 22-year-old pickup truck. Okay. It's not a Maserati, but it's my truck. And I know what all the creaks and cranks and tings and what they sound like because I've spent a lot of time in that truck. It may not be the best truck in the world, but it's my truck. When you get in, going through this is like getting into another vehicle. Nothing's familiar. So you don't know if the ding you heard going down the road is that the engine's about ready to fall out, or if it's just a creak in the way the truck sounds when it goes down the road. So this loss of familiarity, if it was bad, it may have been familiarly bad.
Mm-hmm.
You had some level of predictability. You had some level of consistency. And then someone wakes up one morning and they said, I'm out of here. All that goes out the window.
Or your reality radically changes.
Well, and what it does is that it attacks what you thought was reality to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you thought was real has just been proven to you that it wasn't real.
The bubble got burst. It's the same thing that happened on 9/11. We had never been attacked like that since World War II and never on the mainland. And all of a sudden, we're all panicking, thinking, how safe are we?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you live in, on the East Coast or the West Coast, people were panicking. They were overwhelmed. For those of us who are old and can remember. The next one that tends to be very common is this feeling of either rejection or abandonment. If you're the one who is surprised by the separation, it's very difficult because now you're beginning to think, well, what did I do wrong? The same question you had earlier, James, is, what's wrong so I can fix it? Rejection usually is we're interpreting ourselves as somehow deficient. And if we could just find the problem, maybe they won't leave us. Abandonment is when the other person just abandons, walks away, and we feel that sucking, gasping grief, and we don't know what to do with it. But they're very connected, rejection and abandonment. And it's usually happening when you believe the other person is gone because you're not good enough or you weren't able to keep them. You may not have clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's really obvious why they left, but oftentimes there's no clarity. But that self-doubt begins to insert itself in your life. Because why would someone leave me unless there's something wrong with me? That's a big question that people tend to move to. I'm wondering about you guys in terms of what you've seen in divorce care, rejection and abandonment. Is that a theme you see? I see it because I'm in counseling, but do you see it?
Huge. I think that is probably, that is usually when a person first comes into the group. Rejection is something that they are just it completely permeates their being. That's what I think initially you see this hurt that is so extreme. Because rejection, even if you're rejected by somebody you don't like, you still feel that push away. And one thing I want to bring up, though, is so this is what we see when they come in, but also from my experience, the rejection and the abandonment can be in the marriage itself and come over time. And it can be a slow process that you're going through. And that is very, very confusion on that, a lot of confusion on that. But I think the one thing that is important with this is with all these different things that we're going through is to be able to name it. To be able to name what it is that you're feeling at this moment in time. And if you name it as I'm feeling rejected, once again, thinking again, you can start to maybe sort out whether you truly have been rejected. Rejection sometimes is taking ownership for something that you're not responsible for. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I think, when somebody tells you that they don't love you anymore, that is the penultimate way of abandoning and rejecting someone. But I think a lot of times, what I did and what I've seen other people do is that they translate I don't love you anymore into I'm not lovable.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get to that in a minute.
And that is a wound and a pain that just cuts you straight to the core. For you to reach the conclusion that you're not lovable is the deepest pain and the deepest hurt that I can imagine. And I know what it feels like because I've been there.
Rejection is something we all fear. It's the first thing we need as children when we're born is to know that we're safe in our mother's arms and that we are part of her and we have a safe place. Rejection denies all that. Abandonment denies all that. And it leads. So you mentioned a moment ago, Kathy, you went to the cognition. Mm-hmm. Right? If I can name it, at least I have something to target and I can figure it out. Men go to the cognition very quickly, but they don't take rejection as necessarily a challenge. Maybe it is fair. Maybe they are taking responsibility for something that's not theirs. That would make a logical sense to me in terms of analysis of an emotion. Most men go to, I failed. I have failed my marriage.
Failure.
And it provokes this feeling of inadequacy. Mm-hmm. So when I was a kid, I was not really, all that healthy. So I always got picked last for the teams because I couldn't run. And I hated when I start choosing up teams. I knew this was going to be a horrible experience. And it's a feeling of rejection because I was inadequate to be desired. It's this fear or belief that somehow you're just not big enough for the job. Mm-hmm. You're just not good enough. Inadequacy assigns the blame to you. It says you have a deficit. You have a missing personal quality or an inability to measure up. It ignores the more likely fact that certain behaviors or certain events or actions in the marriage have led to this divorce. You're right, Kathy. It comes over time. But the statement, I want a divorce, is so final when people say it. Mm.
Well, it is because that, as I said many times, nobody wakes up one morning and says, I want a divorce. Mm. I just woke up this morning and I decided I want a divorce. It's something that they've contemplated. It's something that they've thought about. It's something that they have played through the scenarios in their minds. And what we see in divorce care, typically 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. So, every time. So in reality, you've been living a lie for the last 2 to 3 years and you didn't even know it. Every time you came home from work and your spouse met you at the door and gave you a hug and a kiss and said, I love you, that was a lie. Mm-hmm. It was all facade.
So what is reality?
Exactly. And when anyone defines themselves of where I am in relationship to others, and then you have that level of abandonment and rejection, you don't know who you are anymore. Mm-hmm. You can get there of redefining yourself over time, but most of us have lived in dysfunctional marriages. and you defined yourself as a spouse, and you defined yourself as a father, and you defined yourself as this and that. And now your biggest landmark, your biggest post that says, this is who I am relative to this point in time and relative to this position is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was just lost.
And that's something that, like I said, you were the one that was left. I was the one that left, James. And so one thing that we don't think about in this moment, we don't think about, if we're the person that left, we're not thinking about the fact that this person that we left is feeling rejected. We don't think about them. We're so self-focused in that moment in time that we're not even aware of what this other person could possibly be feeling. And that's something that comes later in the healing process. It takes a while to get to that point where you can start to look at this person as a person.
It's very hard to make the decision to leave the marriage and at the same time maintain a deep empathy for the other person, because it's going to pull you back in,
right,
and you're trying to disconnect. So it's natural to try to disconnect that empathy. And as you were talking, James, especially when you're talking, I was thinking about, I think it's in the New International where it talks about Moses, the certificate of divorce that Moses was permitted to give was for acts of marital unfaithfulness. Well, if you're lying to your spouse about love and how you feel about them for years, that's about as unfaithful as I can imagine.
And if you treat them poorly, that's unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, Jesus said, in the beginning, it wasn't so, but Moses allowed for a decree of divorce due to the hardness of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the absence of empathy.
And so, when your spouse gets to the point that they're saying that I'm leaving, it's like it's like an ice cube freezing, and the final molecule of water has gotten fixed and set. And at that point, it's done. And you can argue, and you can beg, and you can negotiate, and you can make promises, but it doesn't matter. In their mind, they've already moved on.
That's exactly, you just provoked a memory of mine I didn't remember. I don't recall having, but it's there now. I was fighting with my wife the night I decided we were going to get a divorce, and I was fighting for the survival of our marriage. And I don't remember exactly what she said. I do remember the look on her face, but there was a point where all of a sudden I went from fighting for my marriage to this, almost could see a wall come up, and I knew it was over. And from that point on, I was closed to anything she had to say. It was done for me.
Yeah, that was similar. That was similar for me, because in years, I started out saying, I'm so unhappy. This is such a bad situation, but I'm married for life. I'm staying no matter what. And I did that for years and years. And then there was one thing that happened, and it clicked with me. I said, I can't do this anymore. I just realized I can't do this anymore. And there was a switch in me. Mm-hmm. But I actually said, well, okay, here's the situation. We can either go see a counselor or we can see a lawyer. What would you like to do? And he chose lawyer. I said, okay, then this is which couch do you want? But I mean, I'm saying is but it was like all of a sudden it was that switch where I knew that there was a turning point. Yeah.
And once that switch is thrown, it's really hard to unthrow it, or James likes to say, you can't unring the bell. So that takes us then. You've got the abandonment, you've got the rejection, you've got the uncertainty, you've got the inadequacy. And now we get to what James had mentioned a little while ago. These all kind of combine to make you feel unloved or unlovable. Your definition of self suddenly shifts. And now you've lost your faith in your inherent value to that other person. And that's quite an assault on the self-esteem.
Oh, it's a huge assault. Because at that point, at least, I thought that was my destiny, that I was unfixable, that I was irreparably broken. that I was destined to a life of loneliness until the day I died.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not true. That's not reality. But at the moment, that was all I could see. I never moved towards suicide, but I can certainly see how people can do that. That's a very, very, those types of feelings lead you into a very, very dangerous neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And that the idea of unlovable, this is what we see, what we have witnessed as people coming into the group, and that's exactly where they're at. They think they are so unlovable. There's something, we talked earlier, there's something wrong with them. They are broken.
Yeah, they're inherently defective.
They are. And one of the hardest things, if you're feeling unlovable, you're feeling, oh boy, extremely vulnerable. The hardest thing to do at that point in time is to reach out to another person. And that's why, but actually at that moment in time, you really need to reach out to another person. And you need to, and so that's, in our experience, that's what we see. We see these people coming into the group. And that's one of the things, as we mention it now, we see over time, we see these people who are feeling so unlovable. They move towards loving themselves. They've moved towards believing in God's love for them. And versus relying on this person that hurt them, they start to see the truth. They start to see the reality of it. And you start to see your value to others too, because of the fact that in this process, when you're looking for support and you're involved in a group, you'll find yourself, without even realizing it, reaching out and helping others in that group. And that is key to healing, is when you start to reach out and help others. So feeling unlovable, and you can feel unlovable in a relationship, and so we all need that so bad, no matter where we're at in our lives. We need that sense of being loved. And the truth of the matter is, we are always loved. We might not feel it, but that love is always there around us, and God's love will never go away from us.
But you make a very good point, Kathy. But therein also lies the danger, because you have people who come into groups who feel that they are unlovable, and they've not gone through the hard work of learning how to love themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there's a con artist or someone who just wants to use them, sees them from a mile off, and it feels so good to be loved by somebody,
mm-hmm.
that they just go in and they end up actually creating a bigger mess than they would have if they'd have worked through their issues, because they're so needy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of people out there who will take advantage of needy people. And they end up getting even more deeply wounded and even more deeply hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So a big part of this is sort of recognizing where you are,
mm-hmm.
and recognizing what options you have, and making wise choices for the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, the potential for you to really, really harm yourself.
And we've heard that too.
We've heard that many times.
We've heard that. I got involved with somebody else, and even though I was only involved with them for 6 months, I was even more hurt, more torn apart by that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're wounded like this, you have to guard your heart.
Mm-hmm. You do.
It's scary, because when you're carrying that wound and you believe somehow it's attached to your worth or your value, your lovability, you're afraid to present it to anyone because you don't want to be rejected by them. It's very, very scary. On the other hand, you need it so bad, you're willing to open yourself up to anybody who looks like they're going to accept you. And now you're going to get hurt again.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to resolve that is to learn to love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very hard thing to teach people. Most people who don't feel lovable or loved do not accept that they are lovable.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a long time for someone to just battering down that wall of resistance can take months or years.
Mm-hmm.
Until you love yourself, you really don't know what love from somebody else is about.
No.
Well, and I like the way that Jim puts it, even though he's not here today, he calls it a healthy love of self.
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, you're walking on this balance beam, and it is so hard to maintain some level of balance. And it's so easy to fall off to one side or the other. And so, I can love myself through narcissism, or I can love myself by doing the hard work and developing a healthy love of self and looking at the love for myself and love in light of God's love for me. But it's a very tenuous path.
Mm-hmm.
Your world has been thrown up in the air. It is totally out of control. Your emotions are totally out of control. Talk about the dog, talk about the tail wagging the dog.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you feel a lot of days. And you got to be patient with yourself, and you got to give yourself some time. And you're going to have to develop some better coping skills, because the ones that you used probably aren't working, because if they had, you wouldn't be in the situation that you're in now.
Most likely. Our next podcast is going to have to be about narcissism when we're done with this series, because that's another one that seems to be beating up the world right now.
Oh, and it goes in all different kinds of directions.
Oh, my gosh.
Fascinating.
So we've talked about the inadequacy. We talked about being unlovable. We talked about confusion. We talked about rejection, abandonment. But there's one we haven't mentioned yet before we go on to the other existential feelings, and that's betrayal. Because if you're the one who's being left, sometimes if you're the one who's leaving, it's because a betrayal has occurred in the relationship. And betrayals take on a lot of different forms. It's not always sexual, but it's often something similar to that. But it's when you trust your heart to somebody and they abandon you, or they insert somebody or something else in your role in their life, in their heart, they betray you. And it has its own specific type of traumatic features, or has its own specific type of traumatic definition. We call it betrayal trauma, but it creates a traumatic loss reaction that is like no other. So on top of it, you have the rejection and the abandonment and the feeling unloved and the confusion, all that stuff, the inadequacy. But betrayal will launch all those simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that at least 50% of the people that I see that are going through a divorce, there has been a major betrayal that has brought them there. Sometimes it's the person I'm talking to. They lost their marriage because they did something and they want the marriage back, but they don't understand the betrayal wounded their spouse so much that there's maybe no way back. Let's talk about betrayal for just a moment, because I think it's important.
Betrayal is like a knife in the heart. Betrayal tears you apart in such a way because betrayal is so tied to trust. And when somebody betrays, this is a person that in order to have a healthy marriage, you're supposed to trust this person. And even when you don't, your marriage isn't healthy, in order for you to survive, sometimes you just choose to trust. And with betrayal, that trust is gone. The trust. This person's looking you in the face and they say something to you. And no matter whether it's tied to your relationship or anything else, like, oh, yes, I'll pick up the milk from the store. It's the fact is you can't believe them. You can't believe there's no belief there. You can't trust them that they have your best interest at heart. You can't trust them.
The number one thing that I hear from spouses in betrayal is when they look at their spouse after they discover the betrayal, they think, who am I married to? I don't really know this person.
Right.
They're
because
not
of
who
the
I think.
Secrets, the secrets that come with the betrayal, the lies that become with betrayal. Betrayal is
it's the most personal form of trust violation, because it's attacking what you put your heart and belief into.
Yeah.
Well, I think another way to look at this is that I'm sure we all heard the story of, the emperor with no clothes when we were kids. Well, when you've been betrayed, guess what? You're the emperor. And you've just had your eyes opened and you're standing in front of your entire kingdom butt naked. You're totally exposed. You're totally vulnerable. This person that you've shared your deepest emotions and secrets with, you can't trust them anymore. You have no idea what they're going to do with them. You have no idea how the things that you said in the past are going to be used to shame you, to manipulate you, to embarrass you, And it just feels like complete and total exposure in front of the entire world. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to hide. There's no, bathroom towel that you can cover up your exposure with. You're just standing there naked. Mm-hmm. It's embarrassing. It's devastating. You're just looking for a hole to go run and crawl into somewhere.
Yeah. Betrayal is so intimately personal, and because we treat it separately, we know the cluster of symptoms. One of those is you get frozen. You become unable to make judgments because you don't know if you should go forward or run away.
You don't trust your own judgment anymore.
You lose it all. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a total incapacity when you feel betrayal. And James, you just mentioned shame, which is next on my list. Too often that's the result of feeling unloved or being betrayed or being inadequate. Somehow you see yourself as not good enough. And so you attack yourself. Shame is contempt for self. Mm-hmm. It attacks your character, your worth, or your personhood. It becomes toxic. It becomes consuming, and it causes many different reactive emotions. And it can convince you to allow others to control you or abuse you. If you're so shame-ridden, you're looking for rescue.
Mm-hmm. Well, I heard it described like this, as someone was describing the difference between guilt and shame. And guilt says you made a mistake. Shame says you are a mistake. And if you are a mistake, there's no hope. There's no getting out of this. There's no way to recover because there's something deep inside of you that's fundamentally flawed that you can't fix and that nobody wants and that nobody is willing to even begin to help you figure out what that is to see if it can be fixed. It's like having a handicap, but it's the most devastating handicap in the world that you can have because it completely colors everything that you think about yourself and everything that you think about everyone else.
That's pretty powerful, what you just said. Shame is toxic for a reason. It eats away your soul. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that shame is a God-given emotion. I believe guilt is. The Holy Spirit uses conviction and guilt to make us stop doing bad things, but he doesn't use shame. Shame, I believe, is a corruption of the mechanism of guilt and conviction. Mm-hmm. It's attacking ourselves or attacking someone else with contempt to where you lose hope and faith in your ability to be okay. When you said there's something fundamentally wrong with you, James, if there's something wrong with you and you can't fix it, then you're worthless. Mm-hmm. And that's what shame will tell you. It's a lie. Mm-hmm. Everybody has inherent value. You could do the worst thing on the planet and you still have value. But shame would tell you, no, this is it. And when you've been betrayed, oftentimes shame comes along with it because of the blame shifting and the gaslighting and all the behaviors of the betrayer. When you live in a marriage and you've been lied to for a very long time, you begin to believe your own or you begin to believe the stories about how you're to blame or you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. I had a guy in here this morning was telling me that in his relationship, she decided she wants to move on. And he said, well, how can we fix it? And she goes, well, we can't because you're this way, and this way. And it devastated him. And we had to talk about, just because she says it doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
But see, you go back to the story of creation. And Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And immediately their eyes were opened, which goes back to what I was saying. They betrayed God. Mm-hmm. So their eyes were open. And when he came looking for them, they hid themselves because they were shamed.
Well, it says they were ashamed.
I know, but being ashamed is part of shaming yourself.
It is. It's recognizing how far you have gone off the path, how far you've deviated from character. It's holding yourself in contempt.
Well, yeah.
But what did God do? He restored them.
And so, yes, but in the marriage, you face so much criticism of all your shortcomings and failures from the other person. And then when shame kicks in, it basically raises the bar to such an astronomically high level that then you say that there's no way that I can be this perfect person.
We're never. Sorry.
And it gives all the power to the other person. You are the some source of evil in the world. Mm-hmm. There is nothing redeemable about you, and there's no way that you can ever become anywhere close to what this person says that they want, because of all the blame shifting that goes on from them. And you just feel totally worthless and hopeless.
You buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the shame comes from.
Yeah, you buy into it because you're so devastated, particularly as a male. Okay, then these are all the things I need to fix. But then you find out that the list is endless and they're not fixable. And the reality of it is that most of the things weren't broken to begin with.
And shame is something that, we sit there, we're talking about all these different things, but they are so interwoven. All these things are interwoven with each other, and they can bleed into one another and all that. But shame is something, embarrassment comes with shame. We're embarrassed, and shame is something that means you can't be fixed. Shame is different. Guilt means you feel guilty about something. You can take responsibility and do something about it. When you're shamed, you don't feel there's anything you can do to change that. This is who, like you were saying, you are this situation. You are to blame.
The circumstances are irredeemable.
Exactly. That's the difference with shame, because I know we've talked, God does not want us to feel shamed, because shame takes away our ability and our power to redeem ourselves.
It takes away our identity.
Yeah.
So, we talk about in the garden, they lost the right standing with God. They had to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
He restored them, but he didn't give them back what they lost, because when you lose to that level of shame, it's irredeemable. I'm thinking about like Peter. He denied Christ 3 times. I can't even imagine the amount of shame and guilt he felt. And then when the Lord's standing there talking to him, I could just imagine everybody's around him and they're all happy and celebrating. He's probably got his head down looking at his feet.
Well, when Jesus saw Mary Magdalene at the tomb, he told her, "Go tell my disciples and Peter that I've arisen."
Yeah. And one thing was, and you think of Peter, Peter came though, but he asked for forgiveness. Okay. What did Judas do? He did not ask for forgiveness. His shame was so great that he didn't think he deserved forgiveness. Shame covers our ability to see that God will forgive us.
The most powerful statement a client has ever told me when they were shame-based in their situation was, "I've disqualified myself from the love of God."
Yeah. And that is so evil.
Mm-hmm.
Shame does not come from God.
No, I don't believe shame comes from God at all. Now, shame being toxic is going to trap you into a spiral into self-annihilation or self-denial. And we look to other people to fix it for us because we believe that someone else telling us that we're okay is going to relieve the shame. But shame becomes a belief. Mm-hmm. And so shame is dealt with God. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you're going to do it, is to find that love for yourself that he gives us. He instructs us to. He sees us as a lovable person. We don't regain shame from another person, because another person cannot restore us. Our next big emotion, which is constant for most people when they're going through a divorce, even when they're seeking it, is fear. Primary fear that I hear all the time, and I remember fearing it myself, is I may never find love again. I'm so disqualified now, I'll never find love again. That's a scary one. Facing the idea of love, a loveless life. I think that's why so many people jump into relationships quickly, is because they are afraid that if they don't find a relationship, they'll never find a relationship. And it can be consuming. There's other types of fear too, such as I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt again, so I don't want to find love again. That's another common one. In psychology, there's a theory, they call it the second divorce, where you divorce yourself of the idea that you can ever be safe and marry again. So it's be alone or be hurt. And the fear can trap you between those two. I'm sure that, Kathy, you never felt fear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the fear, fear was there was a lot of fear, because it was fear of it wasn't so much fear of being alone, quite honestly, with me, because I never wanted to go there again. I was not. There was no way. It wasn't. It just wasn't going to happen. But the fears that I had, it's not just emotional fear. I mean, of your vulnerability, of fear of being loved again, the fear of how am I going to survive? How am I going to be able to provide for my children? The fear of when you walk away from a situation and you don't have any credit, and you haven't worked in a number of years, that's a very real fear, and that's a fear that is outside of the emotional stuff that you're going to, but it adds to the everything else that you're going through at that moment in time. That fear.
You feel like you can't do anything about it.
No, you feel no, the fear of the future, fear of the unknown, fear of just, sometimes you can't even name what it is that's driving that fear. You have no idea what you are fearing. It's just that sense of fear and anxiety.
Yeah, uncontrolled anxiety can lead to anxiety attacks, panic attacks.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people don't know what a panic attack feels like till they have one, and they really are convinced they're going to die. That's why we call it that. Yeah. Now, James, you're a guy, and you're fearless. So what do you think about fear?
Oh, it's completely debilitating. Yeah, I spent, at least in the past, quite a bit of time in the woods. And I was talking to you about this the other day. And if you are very quiet and sit still, particularly deer hunting, you see deer walking through the woods, and they're always hypersensitive. Every little noise, every little sound, every little movement, they're looking, because they're in constant fear that they're going to be attacked by a predator, or they're going to be, taken by a hunter. That's what the fear was like. Every shadow, every noise, every movement. You're so deeply afraid for your life because life as you knew it is over. And you just don't know where this is going to stop. You've lost so much. And it's like you're losing ground minute by minute and day by day. And the fear is just completely, totally overwhelming, because you don't know where it stops. And so in that kind of an environment, your interpretation of things is not always completely accurate. Shadows can't hurt you. But at the moment, shadows seem like the scariest thing in the world. Noises can't hurt you. And then you kick into either the fight or the flight response. And you can do both at the same time. It's called retreat.
There's a third one, and that's freeze. A lot of people get totally frozen in the ability to cope. They can't make decisions. They don't know what to feel. They don't know who to trust. When you're hyper aroused, you're on alert. That's what PTSD is. It's this state of hyper arousal. You don't know where the danger is coming from, but you're alert for it all the time.
Well, and you say you don't know who to trust. And the worst part of all of this is that you don't trust yourself.
Yeah.
You don't trust yourself, because all your perceptions that you had throughout the last years of the marriage, where you thought that was reality, proved to be incorrect. So you don't know what's real and what isn't real anymore.
That's right.
You don't know what's real and what's an illusion, and you have no faith in your judgment to be able to test those things and to reach a logical conclusion on what is and what is not accurate.
Fear is, excuse me. Fear is a result of a hurt, of a doubt, and it often leads to anger. A lot of things lead to anger. Any emotion, any core feeling that is not dealt with can lead to anger. And that's probably the most visible of the emotions that we have, because anger is not just a feeling. It also provokes action. We express anger quite loudly to people. It's sometimes passive aggressive. Sometimes, depression is anger turned inward. Aggression is anger turned outward. We feel it inside and we tend to live it on the outside. It's also a strong motivator for demanding changes. A lot of times during a divorce or a separation, probably not so much after the divorce, but during the separation process, a lot of anger comes out because the person is like a drowning victim trying to grab a hold of security, and they want to force you into a particular behavior or circumstance because it is addressing their fear or their hurt. Anger is also the motivator to try to regain control. It's a powerful feeling. And part of it is you're trying to take back what you've lost somehow, make yourself safe and okay. Anger has so many different expressions. I think this is probably the most common one that we can see on people. I don't think it's the most common one they feel, but definitely see on people. I don't know who wants to go first. Who's the most angry person in the room? Everybody jumps up.
John. No.
John. Well, now he's the producer. He doesn't get to be angry.
Well, anger also has somewhat of an anesthetic effect as well.
That's a good point.
Okay? Because when you're angry and you're moving, you're not feeling the pain. It is amazing how the anger becomes so tunnel vision focused because all you're focused on is achieving the goal. You don't care who you hurt. You don't care if you hurt yourself. You don't care if you're hurting because you don't feel your own hurting. So it can become very addictive as well because it gives you this false sense of being in control when the reality of it is that you're totally out of control.
Yeah, if you're expressing anger, you've lost control. That's where the frustration has become too big and it expresses. You said it's an anesthetic. I like that. It's a good way to put it. When you're angry and you don't feel empathy for anybody else and you don't feel fear, you can make a lot of stupid judgments. Not that I ever done that, but I'm sure people have. Anger makes you feel powerful, but it is also probably the shortest path to making egregious errors because our ability to be intelligently cognitive, aware of the outcomes is reduced. When you get into the back of your brain and you're working on fight or flight, which anger is attached to, you're not thinking with your logical part of your brain. You're thinking with your reactive part of your brain. So it keeps you in trouble.
Well, anger in itself is not bad.
It's not a sin.
No. And as we touched on is the fact that anger can sometimes be a signal to you that something's just not right. And sometimes we deny that we're angry, and that's where a lot of times if we deny that we're angry, that's when we turn it in on ourselves. But anger itself sometimes is a motivator. You talked about that. It's a motivator as far as that's what gets us moving.
It's a call to action.
But sometimes we're so afraid of anger. We're afraid that emotion is so powerful sometimes that it scares the heck out of us, and we don't want to feel that. But and anger can be justified. But it's what we do with it that is makes the difference as far as whether or not it's healthy or not.
You're talking about the difference between righteous anger and hurt-based anger that's out of control. And
when you're with somebody that's angry, whoa, you don't have a chance. You don't have a chance. And if you're that person that's angry, whoever you're speaking with doesn't have a chance. They can't get in there. Anger blocks. It's another one of those emotions that blocks what is real because you're, like you said, you are in that third part of your brain there, and you're operating from there. And anger can lie to you.
So anger, though, is righteous anger is different. Righteous anger is the Bible says to be angry, but to not sin. When you're righteously angry, you are able to contemplate the right action. But anger is a motivator, but what does it motivate you to? If it's righteous, it shouldn't motivate you to righteous action. But most of the time, it's hurt-based for us, and we are afraid of it. And you're right, Kathy, when somebody is angry at you, it doesn't matter what you say to them. They're not going to hear the truth in what you say. They're going to hear excuses or diversions or lies, whatever they choose to hear, because they've already pre-concluded that you're wrong. Anger is a tough emotion to abide with, and it's a tough emotion to hold.
And I think all these emotions and different feelings we've been talking today about inadequacy, betrayal, and shame and all that, in this whole thing, we've got that big ball. And I'll say again, is I've said this before, is first educating yourself on this, starting to take apart these different things and naming, figuring out what is it I'm feeling right now. And all that is so important in healing it. Because what we have we're inside this big ball of emotions that are going so many different directions that we don't even know what ends up. And we can't even make a move because we can't, we're frozen. We can't trust ourselves. We can't trust other people and all that. So once we have all these emotions, once you reach the point where you can take a little tiny step out of that ball and start to sort through it and look at it, the dynamics change because once again, you're stepping into your thinking brain. And that's probably, I just remember telling somebody one time, telling people, this one person, when they would get upset, they were so reactive. And so I simply said to them, okay, stop. What part of your brain are you operating from in this moment? And what's funny about that is in that moment of asking that question, it takes them to a different part of their brain. Mm-hmm. But we don't even realize, when we're doing all these things, we don't even realize where this is all coming from.
So you're talking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's a very important thing for people to learn. And unfortunately, we don't teach that in school. We don't teach a lot of things in school that we need. Mm-hmm. Communication and emotional intelligence are two of them that come to mind. There is no such thing as a bad emotion or a negative emotion. We experience them sometimes in a negative or bad way, but we need our emotions. If you haven't seen the movie Inside Out, I think it's a Pixar, it's an animated movie. All the memories are provoking emotions, and they try to get rid of the bad emotions, and the person can't function. It's a great way to understand how emotions, even the bad ones, are important. So all of these emotions, though, when they become strong, they can block your cognitive health. They can take you from the cognition to the reaction, and it's hard to make your way back because the emotions continue, especially if you're hyper aroused. And we get caught up in holding the emotions. My favorite professor used to say, it's not the emotions we have, it's how we hold them that counts. Some people hold them tightly and won't let them go. Holding a grudge, holding anger, holding resentment. Other people look at them and say, yeah, I know what this is, but I'm going to let it go because I don't want to captivate my life. That's emotional intelligence. You have to know where it's coming from, what it's about, what do you want to do with it, and then you let it move on. Kind of like Johnny Depp in the pirate movie. He says, I love those moments of moral clarity. I like to wave as they go by. We like to wave as our emotions go by rather than let them capture us. I thought it was funny. I'll cut it out.
I'm trying to.
Sure,
I don't remember that one.
Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it was the second one.
All right.
Moments of moral clarity. But all the emotions that we have can easily put us in a fight or flight mode if we hold them too tightly or if we take them and become the emotion. We talked several episodes ago about the anger chain and how hurt leads to our core fears that have been activated lead to hurt, which leads to frustration, which leads to anger, and it just keeps going down the chain. The chain that connects our hurt to our anger and ends up taking us to bitterness or rage, when it's unbroken, that's when loneliness and despair can really take hold of you because there's a hole in you that's seeking to be filled. And loneliness starts to say, look how big this hole is. And there's nothing there. Let's talk about how alone we are. Let's be lonely. And it entices you into a place of darkness. That hole is because you have an unmet need and you have to know what it is. So anxiety and the distress from being overwhelmed by emotions begins to re-script your personal belief about yourself, about your lovability, about what's going on right now, the reality, what your future even looks like. It's like if you go blind tomorrow, your entire future changes. You can't see your future anymore. Mm-hmm. Separation and divorce takes us to a place that we never really considered going, or we wouldn't have gone down the path in the first place. Nobody gets married thinking I'm going to get a divorce on purpose. So now that we know what it is, It's about our belief about things and how we feel about ourselves, and understand what's happening that creates this loneliness vacuum. We need to talk about some tools before we let everybody run into despair. And how do we break out of this loneliness? One area that seems to be, I think, under discussed in a lot of ways is this partnership gap that comes from being alone. You're alone, therefore, obviously, you need to have somebody, and people run out. How do we deal with that sucking vacuum when you had a partner, now they're gone? Do we replace them right away to fill the loneliness? Is that the right strategy?
From my perspective, once again, I think it's a matter of you're giving the name loneliness to how you're feeling. You're giving it that name, and you think it's because you think you're feeling this emotion because your partner's no longer there. There can be so much more to it than just the fact that your partner's not there, but that is something that is so obvious. Oh, I'm feeling this way because I am left, and it may not be that at all. So in filling that gap of being left, that idea of being left, as far as that goes, is finding ways, intentionally finding a way where you can be alone without feeling lonely. Defining the fact that, just because you're alone doesn't mean you have to feel lonely. And then because of the fact that we've talked this before, and James, you said something about the exponential idea of you take two half people and you put them together. What do you get? You get a quarter. But it's the idea of becoming whole in yourself. You are enough. So filling the gap of being left by a partner, you fill it, believe it or not, with yourself and beginning to love yourself.
Exactly. If you don't do that first, then you have actually rejected yourself and abandoned yourself. Loneliness is not because somebody isn't partnered with you.
Right.
It's a state of mind, not a state of being. Speaking of states of being and states of mind.
I read something one time that was very helpful for me. And it said, loneliness is not being alone. Loneliness is believing that no one cares. Because you can be lonely in a room full of people. It doesn't necessarily mean having someone else in physical proximity to you. It's really more about feeling that there's someone who cares. And when you're sitting in a house by yourself, sometimes that's hard to believe. But I think it really begins, with believing that God cares. Jesus said, cast all your cares on me, for I care for you. And for me, it was, and there are moments when I'm still feel lonely. I'm alone most of the time, but there are moments when I still feel lonely. And, and I have to remember that God cares, and that he said he'd never leave me or forsake me, but he'd go with me to the end of the world. My children care. My grandchildren care. I spend a lot of time talking to my kids and my grandkids because it keeps me from feeling lonely. I think you also have to expand your world. You have to realize that we need community. We need other people. And to make the mistake of having your spouse be your whole world, I think is not only a fallacy, but I think it's a very serious mistake.
Well, we talk about, the fact is, what is the center of your life? If the center of your life is your job, and that's what you orbit around, or the center of your life is your spouse, and that's what you orbit around. If those things go away, what are you orbiting around? Nothing. But whereas if you put God in the center of your life and you orbit around God, these things may change, but that constant doesn't change. You've got that constant. And so a big part of going through this journey, this painful journey, is shifting your reality is getting shifted to the fact that your life, I'm trying to think of a way to put this. Whereas before, you're feeling all this stuff because your life did center around your spouse or your family. And this has been taken away from you. And you think because that's been taken away from you, you are lost. You are not. This whole process of going through and healing from a breakup of a marriage is the fact that you are shifting your perspective as far as what is the center of your life. What is the true center of your life? And when you come to believe that God is the center of your life, you are able to, it changes your perspective about everything else in your life as far as how you deal with it. And it takes away fear. It takes away confusion. You start to see things more clearly. But it's a scary step to take. But it is a choice. Part of this in your healing process is a choice, is what road do you want to go down? Do you want to stay on the same road you've been on all your life? Or do you want to change that to find what is true? What needs to be the center of your life? It's not that problems don't go away. It's not that problems go away. It's that when you have problems, you don't feel like you're carrying them alone. You don't feel like the problems are so big that they completely envelop you. These things are still there, but you are able to you're able to deal differently with them because your belief system has changed or grown.
I want to see if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
Okay.
Sounds like what you're telling us is if you invest everything about your life, your worthwhile being into another person or another thing, that thing can be lost to you. Then you lose yourself with that. If you invest yourself in yourself and with God, who's a constant, then regardless of the circumstances, you remain. And I think that's what you're talking about in terms of establishing something other than loneliness.
Right.
Look, the reality of it is you're responsible for yourself. And a lot of times the loneliness that you have is because you have too myopic of a view of things. There's a lot of hurting people in the world. There's a lot of lonely people in the world. There's a lot of issues in the world. And I think that sometimes, and I'm talking to myself in this, my loneliness causes me to become self-absorbed. It causes me to become self-centered and self-focused. Go out and serve somebody. Use that pain as a motivation to help someone else. It'll do a few things for you. Number one, in helping others, it helps you with your issues of self-worth. In helping others, it gives you a perspective of maybe things aren't as bad for you as you think they are, because there's so many other people out there who have it so much worse. And by helping others heal, you actually heal yourself. You receive what you give. You reap what you sow. Nobody's going to come to your door and say, "Hey, I heard you were a nice guy. I'd like to get to know you." But you got to get out there. And the best way to get out there in a way that protects your soul and in a way that prevents you from getting hurt again is to be a giver, and to be a giver in the helping and taking care of others. Help others with your needs, and you'll get your own needs met as well.
That's almost, for most people, it's almost like a paradox. They need so much. They feel like they're entitled to take at this point. But when you give, you receive so much more. You get to focus off of this rumination of your loneliness, and you start connecting to other people by serving them.
Yeah. One thing that jumps out, in some ways, that's a form of narcissism. If we look at when we're being narcissistic when we're so focused on ourselves, even though we may not be evil people or bad motivation and stuff like that, we are so absorbed with ourselves that we can't possibly see somebody hurting right beside us.
Good point. So we just kind of hit one of my other points about challenging our beliefs about being alone. What about challenging our beliefs about what it is to be single? So many people seem to think single is a bad thing. If I'm not married or I'm not partnered somehow in life, something's wrong with me.
That is such an exciting discovery for people to make. That is what I have seen in the groups. The people who've gone through that we've seen is like all of a sudden, you know what? I don't mind being alone. I get to do what I want. And it's not that they don't have periods of loneliness. We all do. But they have learned, okay, I'm feeling lonely. Let me pick up the phone and call so-and-so and see how they are doing. So once again, you reach out for yourself. So you learn how, you intentionally learn how to enjoy aspects of being single, of being alone. And you realize that being alone isn't the same as loneliness. Being alone is an opportunity for you to grow and to help others, as we've talked. You change your perspective, and that's part of healing. Part of healing is changing your perspective. Either you changing your perspective or things happening that changes your perspective. It's the same thing that's smack dab in front of you, but by changing your perspective, you see it differently and you react to it differently.
People that love themselves properly, in a healthy way, right, aren't alone because they can sit with themselves and be their own best friend.
Yeah.
Because you know you. Mm-hmm. You appreciate you enjoy you. Doesn't mean you don't want or need other people around you, but you're not deficient. And therefore, you're not looking for other people to fix you.
Right.
Which also makes you one of the most attractive people, because folks that want to be married to someone don't want to be married to a user, an abuser, or a controller.
Yeah.
They want someone who's healthy. Mm-hmm. The problem is we don't go looking for the healthy person first. We usually look for superficial things. But if you love yourself enough to be your own best friend, and somebody else loves himself enough to be their own best friend, you guys can have an awful lot of fun together.
Yeah.
Without the threat. James, Dr. James, in your wisdom, give us a nugget. Come on.
I forgot the question.
We're just talking about being single.
There's pros and cons to everything in life. Yeah. There's pros and cons to being married. There's pros and cons to being single. It kind of doesn't matter. This is where you are now. Look for the pros, minimize the cons, because wherever you are, you need to try to be comfortable with yourself, regardless of what state you're in. So are there pros to it? Yeah. You can do what you want. You don't have to answer anyone. You put your keys on the counter. They're right there when you come back the next day. Things don't get moved around. But there are cons to it as well. And that if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. If you don't vacuum the floor, nobody's going to vacuum it for you. I don't know that it's better or worse. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things is really, we sometimes when we're in life, we look at something that we don't have and think that it's better versus looking at what we have and enjoying that and making it the best it can be.
That's awesome. So last point I want to make before we close is, what do we believe about our future, about taking a risk, possibly getting hurt? Because if our belief about the future is it's really scary and dangerous, that's going to amplify your loneliness because you're going to feel very cut off. You'll be too fearful. Mm-hmm. How we look at the future will tell us how we will exist in the present. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Hope is very important. This is where you are now. It doesn't mean that that's where you will always be, positive or negative, because where you're going to be in the future is going to be a compilation of all the decisions that you make. Mm-hmm. You need to get as healthy as you possibly can, as quickly as you can, so that you can start making good decisions for the long term. Decisions made out of haste, decisions made out of need, decisions made out of deficits are going to just delay you from getting to where you ultimately want to be, which is being joyful, peaceful, free, and hopeful.
Yeah, Jeremiah 29:11. Paraphrasing, I know your future, and there's hope in your future. It's for good. I'm at the point in my life where I can reflect back and see where God has taken these horrible things in my life, these trying things in my life, and he has used and turned every single one of them for good. And I think that, if we can reach that point, that we can take a look at where we're at right now and say, this is a tough place I'm in right now, but I trust that God is going to bring good from this. I know God is going to bring good from this, and let it go to him. It takes a while to get to that place. And we can't, even if it's a place we're often at, sometimes we're not there in different circumstances and we forget this truth. But it is the truth. I have witnessed this in my life. The things that God has done in my life, I can look back and I can see how he has moved in my life, even when I didn't see him there, even when I was hopeless. I look back and I say, wow, there he was. And I just didn't know I just didn't know where he was. So trusting God in this process, as far as what your future is going to hold for you, whether it be that you will remain single, or whether you'll find another partner.
Well, and I think that raises a really good point, Kathy, in that it's not about the destination, it's the journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are so many times that, I feel that this is where I know where I'm at now, and yet I believe that this is where God's going to take me. And I just spend time wondering about, wow, this is going to make a fascinating story, because I don't know how you're going to get from here to there. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be so cool to sit back and watch it unfold. Mm-hmm. What a great story this is going to make. Mm-hmm. And that does a lot for me. Mm-hmm. It gives me hope. It's the scripture in the Bible says, be still and know that I am God, which I interpreted as,
chill.
Just stand still and watch me perform. Mm-hmm. And so I try to start focusing on being sensitive enough to see the movement mm-hmm. as it happens, instead of having to recognize it retroactively.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to see it as it's happening is amazing. Sometimes you are in that position where something is happening, you're going, wow,
But you also have the benefit, all three of us have the benefit really of some hindsight right now. The pain was enormous in the beginning. But like you said earlier, back to the beginning of the podcast, you said that you have a memory of the pain, but you don't feel the pain anymore. Mm-hmm. It's because all the things that have happened as a mm-hmm. result have been positive for you. Mm-hmm. You don't have to sit in pain for the rest of your life. Your life does move on. Mm-hmm. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, somebody who's going through it, they may not be happy that they got a divorce. Mm-hmm. They may still grieve some of what was lost. But if they engage in life mm-hmm. and they do it in a healthy way, and mm-hmm. that's really the key. It's always about doing it in a healthy way, making the right choices. They can have some incredible experiences, and the pain will reduce, sometimes even vanish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and you just never know where life's going to take you. Yeah. I never knew I was going to end up here. I've lived in multiple different states as I was going through my career. There are things I liked about them all. There are things that I didn't like about some of them. But it's all still part of your story. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't necessarily define what the next chapter of your story is. It doesn't have to. Mm-hmm. It's a continuum and an accumulation, not as much of a defining, if you make that choice for it to be that way. Yeah. But it's really up to you.
Yeah, and the thing is for those for people who are hearing this and are in that place of such pain, they're going, you've got to be kidding me. There's absolutely no way. These people don't know what they're talking about.
Unfortunately, we do.
We do. And you know what? We're asking you to trust us, which is scary because you don't even know who the heck we are. But the thing about it is the fact that, honestly, I can honestly say, if you go about this in a healthy way if you get support, if you educate yourself, if you commit to becoming healthy and whole, you will hit a lot of bumps along the road. You'll hit things that'll throw you for the loop, but you will get there.
And the key to that statement that you just made is you. You have to do it.
You have to take responsibility.
Nobody's going to do it for you.
Right.
Nobody's going to solve your problems. Yeah, you have to kind of, and it's easy to do because I've been there, but you got to get up from your pity party and decide that I'm going to take control of my life. My past is not going to define my future, and start moving forward.
All right, guys. Well, I think the discussion, this is a long discussion, but like most of them, it's not really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I think that the bottom line is take responsibility and learn. Don't be reactive, be responsive, and learn to be, not to do. It sounds like a lot, but what we've described is a lot. It sounds like lots of steps, lots of stuff.
It is.
It is a lot, but it's not that hard. I mean, you just have to get in there and do it, and you do it step by step, and you learn what you need to learn. And you'll get there.
Let me say one thing. It was funny. I had a phone call last night, and I was speaking to someone about a particular issue, and I was able to explain the whole thing to them in about 5 minutes. I could have never done that 2 years ago because it was such a mystery and such a morass and so incomprehensible to me. But you will learn the truth, and the truth will set you free. And at the end of the day, the truth is really, really simple.
It is.
It's always simple. Not always easy to implement, but it's always simple. There are steps. For those who have not heard the podcast before, DivorceCare is a free group.
Correct.
I'm not DivorceCare, but James and Kathy lead a DivorceCare group. It's free to attend. It's non-denominational. It takes place in churches all over the world. And you'll get that information. Plus, you'll get wisdom. Plus, you'll have people around you who share your pain. So rather than think, I can't do this, I don't have the resources to reach out maybe to a counselor or go through all the, go to DivorceCare. It's DivorceCare.org.
DivorceCare.org. And it is $20 to get the book.
Well, $20 compared to what it costs for a divorce is well worth it.
And the thing is, once you have that book, you can go every day of the week to a different group if you wish.
It's a powerful opportunity. And if you want to learn, I can't think of a better way to learn it.
They do a wonderful, wonderful job.
And it's a great first step in empowering yourself to become free.
Yes.
And to find peace.
Yes.
Well, since John did such a good job cleaning up, he took my one note that says what we're doing next week. So I don't know.
I think isn't it forgiveness next week?
It may very well be.
I don't know.
That'd be a fun topic. Thanks, guys. Hopefully you have as much fun as me. We'll see you next week. Counselors on the Couch is brought to you by Virginia Beach Christian Counseling, specialists in family counseling, grief, trauma, and loss. Find us at www.virginiabeachchristiancounseling.com. Counselors on the Couch is produced and directed by John Bell, executive producer Dr. Chuck Carrington, with original music score and mastering by John Tyler Music. The opinions expressed here are of the host and the individual guests and are not necessarily the opinion of Virginia Beach Christian Counseling. If you would like to make a comment or would like to ask to be a guest, please go to counselorsonthecouch.com.